Liberalism in the United States is a broad political philosophy centered on the unalienable rights of the individual, the fundamental liberal ideals of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion for all belief systems, and the separation of church and state, right to due process, and equality under the law are widely accepted as a common foundation across the spectrum of liberal thought. Modern liberalism in the United States includes issues such as same-sex marriage, voting rights for all adult citizens, civil rights, environmental justice, and government protection of freedom from want. National social services such as equal education opportunities, access to health care, and transportation infrastructure are intended to meet the responsibility to promote the general welfare of all citizens. Some American liberals, who call themselves classical liberals, fiscal conservatives, or libertarians, support fundamental liberal ideals but disagree with modern liberal thought, holding that economic freedom is more important than equality, and that providing for the general welfare exceeds the legitimate role of government. Since the 1930s, without a qualifier, the term liberalism in the United States usually refers to modern liberalism, a political philosophy exemplified by Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal and, later, Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. It is a form of social liberalism, whose accomplishments include the Works Progress Administration and the Social Security Act in 1935, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. According to Lewis Hartz, liberalism in the United States differs from liberalism elsewhere in the world because America never had a resident hereditary aristocracy, and so avoided much of the class warfare that swept Europe. History. The origins of American liberalism lie in the political ideals of the Enlightenment. The Constitution of the United States of 1787 set up the first modern republic, with sovereignty in the people and no hereditary ruling aristocracy. However, the Constitution limited liberty, in particular by accepting slavery. The Founding Fathers recognized the contradiction, and most expected slavery to wither away. Indeed, it was abolished in all the northern states by 1804, but due to the demand for raw cotton by the Industrial Revolution, plantation slavery continued to flourish in the Deep South. For the time of the American Revolution to the present day, America has extended liberty to ever broader classes of people. The states abolished many restrictions on voting for white males in the early 19th century. The Constitution was amended in 1865 to abolish slavery, in 1870 to extend the vote to black men, in 1920 to extend the vote to women, and in 1971 to lower the voting age to 18. The Jim Crow system of the South between the 1890s and 1960s relegated blacks to second-class citizenship, until it was overthrown by the Civil Rights Movement and new federal laws in 1964 and 1965. Thomas Jefferson believed that America should remain a nation of small farmers. As the American economy began to shift to manufacturing and services, liberals began to fear threats to liberty from corruption and monopolists. Wealth and the influence it brought was increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few business owners, shifting from the previous system of a few large landowners, and raised new questions whether political democracy could survive the power of the rich. The dominance of the Republican Party for most of the era 1860 to 1932, the third-party system, and the fourth-party system, prevented any major reversal of the concentration of wealth. During the progressive era of the the early 20th century, laws were passed restricting monopolies and regulating railroad rates. According to James Rightly, it was during this era that the term liberal took on its current meaning. Prior to the early 1900s, the term had usually described classical liberalism, which emphasizes limited government and the free market. During the 1920s, the term progressive became associated with politicians such as Robert La Follette, who called for government ownership of railroads and utilities in his 1924 third-party presidential bid, and Theodore Roosevelt, who came out of retirement to run again for president under a third party called Progressive Party. Later, political figures such as Franklin Roosevelt adopted the term liberal to describe an individual in favor of some government activism but opposed to more radical reforms. After 1933, modern liberals used the New Deal to provide jobs during the Great Depression. The Social Security Act of 1935 provided retirement and disability income for Americans unable to work or unable to find jobs. In the Social Security Act of 1965, this was extended to provide benefits for Americans unable to work due to illness. A reaction against modern American liberalism began with Barry Goldwater, which led to the eventual election of Ronald Reagan in 1980. The intellectual foundations of this conservative resurgence included the works of free market economists Milton Friedman and the Chicago School of Economics, who argued against central economic planning, regulation of business, and Keynesian economics. Deregulation began in the mid-1970s and had broad support from both liberals and conservatives. Reagan successfully lowered marginal tax rates, most notably for those at the top of the income distribution, while his Social Security reforms raised taxes on the middle and bottom of the income distribution, leaving the total tax burden unchanged. Democratic President Bill Clinton worked with conservatives against strong liberal opposition to end some of the main welfare programs and to implement NAFTA, linking the economies of the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Clinton pushed to extend modern liberal ideals, especially in the areas of health care and environmental protection. According to Lewis Hartz, liberalism was the only significant political tradition in the United States. However, in the 1970s, Bernard Bailyn, Gordon Wood, and J.G.A. Pocock saw republicanism as the main political tradition. In the 1980s, J. David Green returned to Hartz's thesis, but saw two different types of liberalism in the tradition, which he called humanist and reform. More recently, writers have seen a multitude of traditions, including liberalism, republicanism, and Protestantism. Varieties. Early liberalism. The United States of America was the first country to be founded on the liberal ideas of John Locke and other philosophers of the Enlightenment. With no monarchy, no hereditary aristocracy, and no established religion, the American Bill of Rights guarantees every citizen the freedoms advocated by the liberal philosophers: equality under the law, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to gather in peaceful assembly, the right to petition the government for redress of grievances, and the right to bear arms, among other freedoms and rights. In this sense, virtually all Americans are liberals. However, questions arose, both before and after the country was founded. In the Dred Scott decision of 1856–57, the Supreme Court ruled that these rights only applied to white men, and that blacks had no rights whatsoever that any white man was obliged to respect. Therefore, the Constitution was amended several times to extend these rights to ever larger classes of citizens, to all citizens in 1868, then specifically to blacks in 1870, to women in 1919, and to people unable to afford a poll tax in 1964. Classical liberalism in the United States is the belief that a free market economy is the most productive. It may be represented by Henry David Thoreau's statement that government is best which governs least. Classical liberalism is a philosophy of individualism and self-responsibility. Classical liberals in the United States believe that if the economy is left to the natural forces of supply and demand, free of government intervention, the result is the most abundant satisfaction of human wants. Modern classical liberals oppose the concepts of social democracy and the welfare state. Modern liberalism. In 1883, Lester Frank Ward published Dynamic Sociology, or Applied Social Science, as based upon statistical sociology and the less complex sciences, and laid out the basic tenets of modern American liberalism, while at the same time attacking the laissez-faire policies advocated by Herbert Spencer and William Graham Sumner. Ward was a passionate advocate for a sociology which would intelligently and scientifically direct the development of society. Another influential thinker in the progressive era was Herbert Croly. He effectively combined classical liberal theory with progressive philosophy and founded the periodical The New Republic to present his ideas. Croly presented the case for a mixed economy, increased spending on education, and the creation of a society based on the brotherhood of mankind. Quote, in 1909, Croly published The Promise of American Life, in which he proposed raising the general standard of living by means of economic planning, though he opposed aggressive unionization. In The Techniques of Democracy, he argued against both dogmatic individualism and dogmatic socialism. As editor of The New Republic, Croly had the forum to reach the intellectual community. Liberalism wages that a state can be strong but constrained, strong because constrained, ... Rights to education and other requirements for human development and security aim to advance the opportunity and personal dignity of minorities and to promote a creative and productive society. To guarantee those rights, liberals have supported a wider social and economic role for the state, counterbalanced by more robust guarantees of civil liberties and a wider social system of checks and balances anchored in an independent press and pluralistic society.